Apologize for being gone last week. I'll tell you, I miss when we're not here, and it doesn't happen very often on a Sunday morning, but I truly do miss that. A couple weeks prior, we started a new study talking about the idea of a generation arising that does not know the Lord. Remember, Exodus chapter 1, verse 8 was kind of like our starting point, and that passage has a generation or a Pharaoh coming to power that did not know Joseph. And when we think about that, we think of all that Joseph did through God's providence, right? That's the study of providence in the Bible, is Joseph, right? He goes through all of these things, and God allows him to attain a position to save his people. And it's quite remarkable. He is second in charge to only Pharaoh. Everything that he says is done, and the country survives through the famine, or stores through the years of plenty and survives through the famine, and he restores his people or allows them to come out the other side. But when this new Pharaoh arises that does not know Joseph, then we have trouble, right? And of course, that leads to God's people being put into bondage. They become a great nation in terms of numbers, and then we see the lessons recorded with that. But the thought of not knowing is illustrated in the Bible in many ways, and we looked at several passages. We've seen, typically we think of this, a generation arises that does not know God, and we talked about all the variations. There's one that perhaps regards a people that have gotten so far from God, time and worship-wise, that they may not have actually known God. That was, I believe, in Hosea, actually forgetting about God. But most cases, to not know God not so much represents not knowing who he is, but not following him. They did not know him in that they did not exercise his will in their life. And that is primarily the situation. You remember, this kind of comes to the point of where we see the book of Judges, where God's people have basically turned themselves into a continual cycle. Remember, there's rebellion, then there's oppression, then there's cries of or help for deliverance, there's a deliverer, and then there's a relapse. And this goes over and over and over. And yet every time there's a relapse, we see that same thought that there's a generation that arises that does not know God. Remember, we talked about why does man reject God's way? First of all, conforming to the world. Second, idolatry and pagan influence. A forgetfulness and lack of faith is three. Desire for human leadership. And finally, stubbornness and self-will. And that's kind of where we had jumped off and started to talk about our next generation, really with a focus to our children. And I don't think, I don't think we talked about this, but maybe you don't have little ones at home. Maybe you never had little ones at home. Maybe you're past that time. Maybe now the little ones are the grandchildren. We all, I think, have an opportunity, if not an outright responsibility, to our young. And when we think about this body, this group that meets here, how fortunate these young ones are that there are older ones, not even parents, but others that are willing to help train up and show. We were just talking with Kim's uncle yesterday, and we were talking about the sounds in the church, and he says, boy, when you don't hear the kids anymore, you're in trouble. And as we travel around and we see various groups and we worship with different people, it is always encouraging to see the little ones. And I know sometimes, we might get upset because of a little one crying or making a fuss. Talk to anybody on an airplane, right? But in our worship service, we have to overcome that sometimes with a great spirit of gratitude, I think, because if it weren't for that, we would be sorely struggling. And so we started to talk about conforming to the world. And we talked about how in Psalms 127, verse 3, children are a gift from God. Remember, they're attributed to like arrows for an archer, right, in his quiver. There are arrows in his quiver. We talked about Deuteronomy 6, verses 6 and 7. And then we came to Proverbs 22, verse 6, and this is where we had started to camp out a little bit. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6. But train up a child in the way in which he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And we talked about the way. That's God's way, right? Psalms 119, 105. We know that God has a way. Doesn't always seem right to man. God's ways are not man's ways. And by faith, you and I launch out into God's way. And so when we think about our children, we think about not being conformed to this world. We want to train them in God's way, obviously. Galatians 6, we talk about when he is old. That passage in verses 6 and 7 of Galatians, or 7 and 9 in Galatians 6 says, or talks about sowing, right? Whether we sow unto the physical or unto the body, or if we sow spiritually, we are going to reap whatever we sow. And so we are encouraged to sow the spiritual things. And that kind of is the thought when we think about our children, right? When you think about learning, where does most learning occur? It occurs at very young ages, right? And children are these sponges, right? And you just put them in an environment and they just soak it all up. It's something that you and I as adults struggle with, right? How many times do you? I mean, that's like guys don't want to read instructions, right? Well, first of all, we can read them, we don't understand them. So we end up reading things 2 or 3 times to really get a grasp of what's going on, it seems like. And yet kids can just absorb. And so the thought is the things that they absorb when they're young or when they're little will reap or be reaped when they are older. And how important do you suppose that is? Do we know that troubles are coming? Who in here of an age has not gone through troubles? And I think some people meet the really hard things at different stages of life, right? But I assure you, the days are evil, Scripture says. And so when we are founded or deeply rooted in God to begin with, in His Word, in following Him, we will stand a better opportunity of surviving those evil things, those evil days when they come, Galatians 6. Will not depart. 2 Timothy chapter 3, 14 and 15. Remember, Paul is encouraging young evangelists. He's saying, look, you know these things. You are grounded in these things, and let them have its way with you, basically, right? Verses 14 and 15. The thought here then is, train up a child in which he will go, and he will not depart. Now remember, this is one of the Proverbs, and well that is a truth. It is not an ultimate. It still can go awry. Man still has the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to reject that. And sometimes that happens. And you and I all know examples of that, where even though one is trained and trained well, still leaves. And so until God calls that person home, there is still the opportunity, though, to repent and be whole again. Remember, to train, the Hebrew word there is shanak. And if I'm pronouncing that right, it means initiation. In other words, to enact on somebody to make them a part of or an entering. And if we think of initiation, first thing we think of is some of these evil things that college kids do to one another to become part of a club, right? But it's a little different than that, though. One of the other expressions is to taste. And we mentioned how even as children or baby animals, we will introduce them to solid food or more mature food, but we will do it at a very slow pace. We won't just set an entire dinner before them. That doesn't make any sense. But we'll give a baby food. It's food that has been macerated to the point that they can actually ingest it and take it. And it starts to change their body. The very metabolism that is causing them to grow will be altered because of this food. And we know that's important, right? We have to grow. I am convinced that there are some Christians that don't want any part of growth. They just want to be simple, in other words. And I don't think God's pleased with that. I don't think He's willing to say, yeah, you just stay right there while I demand so much of everybody else, as I chasten, as I discipline. And then so when God does try to discipline such an individual and they refuse to go, grow, we have a recipe for defeat. But this word shanak means to taste, and I think that is really makes a lot of sense when we think about our young people. So this is where we left off. Um, Philippians chapter 4 and verse 9. Philippians 4 and verse 9. Philippians 4, verse 9, Paul says here, "Of the things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you." You know, so many times Paul called his brother, like Timothy, his son in the faith. And he looked at these individuals that he had gone into an area and taught the gospel, and there was response to that. You can really see him looking at them as though they are his children. And here, this verse really seems reminiscent of these, in that he even points to himself and he says, "Look, these things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things." And how do children learn? Is it just by what they hear? Absolutely not. In fact, perhaps the greater example is that of example, the things that they see. And so, frightening as parents, right? That we're being watched. I mean, that should scare us to death a lot of times because I'm not sure we're worthy. God has given us these little creatures, and part of their learning is watching you and I. And so it's a very sobering thought. So tell me, or you share with me, what are some of the first things that we are going to allow our children to taste? What are we going to slowly but surely introduce them to? Are there any thoughts? I have to preach, so you have to help with Bible class this morning. Okay. Taste, yeah? Yeah. Yeah. So what are some of the first things that we teach? God's love. Okay. That God is a creator. What else? Not that we'll leave any of these thoughts. I'm fishing for something else, apparently. Russ. Right and wrong. Yeah. Um, what would go along with that? With right and wrong? Obeying, sharing, authority, right? It telling the truth. I think what's one of the first words that we as parents tend to say over and over and over and over when we start training. It's no. And so there's this idea of authority, right? And when you think about that, I mean, we had some good answers talking about God right away. Is God the first thing that they actually hear when it comes to authority? You know, I've got a silver lab at home, and that dog thinks I'm God. And he doesn't know any better, and I ain't gonna tell him any different. You did, huh? You know what? You know why I'm a dog person? Because a cat looks at you and he could care less. But that dog, ever since he was little, has known that I'm like the master of the house, and he can get away with things with mom that he doesn't get away with me. And all I have to do is look at him a certain way, and I mean to tell you now, in his age, he'll wet himself. He's like 10, 11. And that poor dog, I mean, I got to be careful with him now because he wants to please me. And I love that I can go to him and show him affection, and it's just, for whatever the reason, it's the world to him, right? And so I think our kids are a little bit like that. When the lessons on authority starts, it's because mom or dad have said something or have shown them something. Maybe it's that the stove is hot. Maybe it's not to hit your brother, or to tie him up, push him upstairs, and whatever. But at first, it's mom and dad and the authority there. It seems to be. Now, that's quickly going to change, right? What is going to change that for that child when they know that they have to listen to what mom or dad says? What do you think is going to be the visual, the things that they hear that is going to take that message and tell them, you know what, there's something more here? What is it in our home? What do you think? Tone of voice? When we come together and we eat supper, what do? It's chaos, right? I mean, mom's running here and there. There's food flying all over the place. Suddenly, we're all finally sitting down, and what do? Hopefully, bow our head in prayer to God. And now, the mom that I'm subject to, the father that I don't want to disappoint, are praying to the Almighty. They're showing reverence to God, and it's going to be natural for that child to what? To do the same, right? Is there anything sweeter than that little one when they start to pray? I mean, that's awesome, isn't it? And they already know to look right past you and to who is really the one of authority if we're doing this right. Now, they love us, right? We are here, we are with them. When they're hurt, they're going to cry, they're going to go to mom, all those things. But when they see you and I giving allegiance to Christ or praying to God, showing who we are subject to, they are going to respond to that. I think it's really important for them to hear us pray, to hear us vocalize the authority that we understand that God is in our lives. And if that's not the case, they're missing something already. And it's really something we need to think about. Train up a child, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. What, I have this penchant for getting on YouTube sometimes and watching these videos. And one of the types of videos that I have taken a little bit of fun or entertainment in watching are when these policemen make a traffic stop, okay? And you can go and you can find all kinds of these, but there's this ideology out there that some are preaching and some are espousing and actually teaching classes on, called the sovereign citizen. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but these people tend to believe that government is not the authority in this land, and that I can claim sovereign citizenship, and I'm not liable to the rules and regulations that the local authorities are trying to put on me. And these people will always say some of the same words and things like, I'm not working for hire, or I'm not commissioned by someone, and they don't respect the authority of the policeman that's stopping them. And you know for some reason I enjoy watching these people be told that no, that's not the way it works. um, and and so in Matthew chapter 22, or maybe let's turn to Romans chapter 13 first. Romans 13. Romans 13, verses 1 through 7. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those who exist are established by God. There's a lot there, isn't there? Now, would we say that all authority on this earth coincides with God's will? is akin to what God desires for man to be? No. No. In fact, there are all kinds of governments that are horrible, that do not take care of their people as they should, that are corrupt or full of greed or these types of things, and yet God has seen fit for them to be in place. Verse 2, therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear and of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Verse 5, therefore it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of the wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Render to all what is due them. Tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Now, this could be a part of a grander lesson, I'm sure. We could look back through history and see some governments that were just absolutely terrible, and yet God effectively changed or allowed those governments to be changed. I think you just go back to wartime and see that. And so there is an ebb and flow with these things, surely. But to sum up the whole matter, when we get to verse 7, is akin to Matthew chapter 22, verse 21, right? Where you remember the Pharisees and scribes are plotting to get together against Jesus. They're trying to come up with the best question to trap him. And it says that as he sees them approaching, he sees the malice in them. And they ask him, tell us, is it right to pay the poll tax unto Caesar? And Jesus famously, in his answer, says, give me a coin. Whose inscription is on it? Caesar. And he then says, basically what verse 7 says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. But what? Unto God what is God's. And so God has allowed this authority to be in place. And there is not every arm authority that I'm pleased with in our own land. I'm pretty sure if I was a member of some of these other countries, I would really be upset with some of the authority that is imposed, because you and I are amongst the freest people on the face of the earth. But is that ultimately what God is concerned about? No. He's concerned about rendering to him what is his. And that and us obeying the authority over us in our area, our region, our country, whatever, is just part of us being the good citizens that God asks us to be. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, right. Right, where responsibility would fall to them first, yes. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. And yet we understand that not all families are part of the Lord's church either. And sometimes there arises need because family does not respect God's word. Yeah, right. And so, when I watch these videos of these sovereign citizen debates, the police have the ability, have the right, in some of these cases, there are laws being broken, say, for example, with intoxication and minors in a vehicle and such thing, they have the obligation to remove that person from behind the wheel. And that's where some of these videos, in my mind, become kind of interesting, because we like to see people get what they have coming, right? I guess that's part of it. But the idea is, or I guess what is so stark about this is the lack of respect for authority. And when I look at that, I just see society spiraling out of control. And it's discerning. It's a struggle to see that. Right. And it leads to so many other things, right? Yeah. Well, yeah. Hmm. 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 Right. 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 And so when we think about training a child up, though, and I think about those first lessons at home, if if our children, if we are demanding them to recognize our authority by listening, by doing, right, by knowing us, and then they see us submitting to God, calling upon God, praying to God in those ways, uh, it, that to me seems like a natural fit for them. They will begin to understand um, the authority, the breakdown of the levels of authority, the responsibility of each, and and then their ultimate responsibility in giving their life to God when the time is right. Um, what do you think? Do you suppose our society is lacking in some understanding of authority today? Yeah. Mhm. Right. Right. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. 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 Yeah, and I think even when we look at our local governments, when we take police officers for example, not every police officer is pure as wind-driven snow. Every man is fallible, and so many times is the case with authority or with leadership when something that is perceived as power is put upon somebody, it goes right to their head. What is amazing about that is I think that the people that struggle with this the most are people in positions of service. And so they are given an authority to provide a service, to actually do something for their fellow citizen, and they can't handle it. it just goes over. Yeah. I'm gonna tell you a story. A couple weeks ago, we were at a ball game, and as the kids were playing, there was a student section. And if you want to see disarray in our society, go to a basketball game and look at the student section. There was one young man in there that was making some rather loud and derogatory comments. Just prior to this game, we heard the announcement that we always hear at these sporting events that, you know, WIAA and the school district here encourage good sportsmanship, and we are not going to have things of demeaning, language, character, things such as this. And this is going on for a better part of half the game. And my thought is, why is nobody stopping this? Why? Okay, so we believe this. We even say it. We made an announcement for it. But apparently, this individual doesn't have a parent here that cares. And we don't have one administrator or one school official willing to walk up and really pull that kid out by his ear and give him a talking to is what he needed. This was not at our school. It was at another school. I'm pretty sure this would have happened at Spencer because I know Miss Laura wouldn't let it go on. Yeah. But there's something missing in that young man's life, isn't there? At some point along the way, he was not told or shown proper authority and respect of it. And right, right. And I know for a fact, because I was close enough to hear him after this game, that he saw nothing wrong. Even though his friends are challenging him for his actions, he saw nothing wrong with it. That's a young man that is unfortunately probably headed for some pretty hard days because he's going to run into situations and not respect the authority that's being presented over him, and he's gonna have problems. Do you have a comment, Jeff?
Yeah, kind of getting back to the point where they're children, and that dog we're talking about, you can become a drunkard, and you can beat your children's mother, and the dog will still love you, and show you protection, with no problem. But our children at a very, very young age see that,
Mm-hmm.
and they look for the true example, or whatever example they see, is what they're gonna end up being.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't fool them. I mean, if you're
Right.
half baked,
Yep.
like we talked earlier, if you're Christian only the word, they see that right away.
Yep.
So your combined action is what's going to determine what these children are. If you show authority and you love and they respect you
Mm-hmm.
and love you for that, later on in years they'll just go over that.
Right.
But if you lack showing that authority, and sometimes that takes the battleship and mom and the backside point. I don't
Right.
remember says
Right.
that's necessary.
Yeah.
But that child is so much different than our pet in that respect that
Mm-hmm.
it leads me. And we fail with the authority factor. We let these kids get away with murder in a sense. So let's not talk and blame these teenagers for these kids that
Mm-hmm.
don't respect the
Right.
from driving
Right.
their officer, so we let it do that.
Right. Yeah. Sure. As we think about it as parents ourselves, I mean, the years of really um, training these children are short. I mean, they are so quick. And I think that as young parents, it's easy to think that tomorrow will be the turning point or be the opportunity for us. Things are too hard, I'm too busy, something's not right just now. Maybe I'm not even as faithful as I should be, and I'm putting that off. That's hurting these kids, yes. Tim? Mhm. 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 Right. Mhm. Full, right. Yeah. Mhm. Right. Yep. Mhm. Mhm. I heard a story one time. Did you have a comment? Mhm. A relationship with him. I think he said that man does not have children of his own as well. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Starting young. And this man has a connection with them. And then later on, he's got the ability to put his arm around him and say, hey, those children that need that assurance, maybe they're not getting that at home. I heard a story about um, H.W. Bush, the elder, one time, who was, I think, on the White House lawn when his son, George W. Bush, was taking off in Marine One, the helicopter. He was going someplace, whatever. And the Secret Service men held him as he saluted that helicopter as it took off. Now, he wasn't saluting his son. He wasn't really even saluting the President of the United States, but the office that it represents. And I think that's a pretty cool story because we're not always going to agree with the authority over us. We're in government and politics and the policemen or whatever it is, we're not always going to agree with what's happened. But we have to respect the office. And in part, because of what we read here today, God has allowed that to be in place for our good. And if it were not for that, our world would be chaos. It would be every man for himself, and we've seen examples where that has happened at times in history, and that is not good. Um, we are about out of time. Is there anything else anybody like to share? The next week, I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit more about these first things that we would taste. Elements of worship would be one. If you think about that, introducing our children to the worship setting, what does that look like? And then, how about stewardship and the responsibilities of that? So, there's a couple things I'd like us to think about for next week. Any other comments before we close? Yeah. Yeah. Sure.